Good afternoon, everybody. There are no public questions from the public, so we will move straight into agenda item 1. And agenda item 1 being confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September this year. They have laid on the table for the requisite time. Is it your wish that I sign them as an accurate representation?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. With your indulgence, I will do that later. Apologies for absence. Fiona.
Apologies from Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much. And declarations of interest.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had a number of declarations from Councillor Ward, Councillor Beeman, Councillor Merriweather and Councillor MacLeod have declared a non-pecuniary interest in item 11 and the proposed asset transfers to Farnham Town Council in that they are residents of Farnham and members of Farnham Town Council. However, they have no position of authority within the Town Council. Therefore, they're declaring a non-pecuniary interest which they do not feel will influence their decision-making at Waverley Borough Council. Councillor John Neal has declared a non-pecuniary interest in the same item and intends to withdraw from the meeting whilst it is being discussed. As leader of Farnham Town Council, he wishes to avoid any perception that he may have a conflict of interests that might prevent him from making an objective decision.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest immediately, or do we have everything? Thank you very much. Item 4, questions from members of the public.
None, Chairman.
And item 5, questions from members of the council.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a question from Councillor Jerry Hyman. The question and the response have been tabled and it was sent to him earlier today.
Councillor Hyman, do you wish to read your question?
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, if I may quickly, because it's not a particularly long question. I think this is taken from exactly what I submitted. Does the Executive accept that the clarification of the April 2018 People over Wind and Germany rulings of the ECJ, provided within the 22nd July 2019 National Planning Practice Guidance, NPPG, on appropriate assessment, in respect of the requirement that authorities, and I quote, must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures, confirms beyond equivocation that the use of Natural England's strategy of evading detailed assessment of SANG and SAM measures through the Thames Basin and East Joint Strategic Partnership Board Delivery Framework and the Waverley Borough Council avoidance strategies is and always has been an unlawful strategy, such that the moratorium on granting consents to new housing within the visitor catchment zones of the Thames Basin and Weldon Heath special protection areas, which was implemented temporarily from May last year, must now be reinstated with immediate effect until such time as the requisite evidence and appropriate assessments can be produced, and if not, please state the justification in full. If you would, thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hyman. I am passing that to the portfolio holder, Councillor MacLeod, to answer.
Thank you, Chairman. The answer is quite long, so please bear with me while I read it out. The Habitats Regulations, Regulation 63, require that a local planning authority may not grant permission for any plan or project which is likely to have a significant effect on any designated European site, special protection area, without first carrying out an appropriate assessment of the implications of the plan or project for the site in question, to the extent that it is first satisfied to a standard of beyond reasonable scientific doubt that the plan or project carries no adverse effect for that site. It was practice at application stage to consider whether proposed mitigation, e.g. the securing of suitable alternative natural green space, normally referred to as SANG, by a Section 106 agreement, would avoid such adverse effect, to enable to screen out certain planning applications so that they need not be subject to full appropriate assessment regarding any possible adverse effect, and which would be referred to in the report before committee at the stage of consideration of the planning application. The existing guidance has now been amended in July to clarify that the People over Wind stroke Sweetman judgment in April 2018 of the European Court of Justice meant that a planning authority cannot take into account any mitigation measures, such as proposed SANG, when initially considering a planning application, in order to screen it out of the need for a full appropriate assessment. The People Over Wind judgment drew on existing rulings, such as the Germany case, which has been referred to. Thus, as a result, mitigation measures intended to avoid any adverse effect of any plan or project can now only be considered as part of a full end-stage appropriate assessment. The amended guidance, in fact, indicates in terms, brackets para 106, that off-site SANGs, and by extension related site access management and monitoring, brackets referred to SAMM, can be acceptable mitigation measures following the People Over Wind case, subject to an appropriate assessment of the plan or project in question, together with any such proposed mitigation. When this authority carries out any such appropriate assessment, consultation on any proposed plan or project likely effects, adverse or otherwise, will be undertaken with Natural England, the statutory appropriate nature conservation body, and other consultees considered appropriate. For example, Surrey Wildlife, as part of that full appropriate assessment process, to ensure full legal compliance with the regulations. Natural England has access to relevant ecological databases with the assistance of the statutory advisor to it, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. The moratorium which has been referred to in the question under reply was lifted when this Council agreed a process for undertaking appropriate assessments with Natural England last year. And in view of the position set out above, the Executive confirms that the Council's current practice accords with the amended guidance and does not accept that the moratorium will be reimposed. Please note that a briefing on the updated habitat regulations process will shortly be given on a date to be notified to all elected members by external legal counsel. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. We'll now move on to item 6, which is Leaders and Portfolio Holders updates. I have no update that I wish to give. Does any portfolio holder have anything that they wish to say? Thank you very much. We will then move on to item 7, Sorry,
Leader, I did indicate to speak on this item. And
you're certainly welcome to speak. I didn't think you'd want to, as there wasn't anything there, but please go ahead.
Well, I was rather hoping that after this response came out that there might be an update from members of the Executive in respect of that, because obviously the response there says that the Executive are taking responsibility for this in the second but the third but last paragraph, and of course the position that's been given to me is the same position which is which was first found not to be satisfactory back in 2006 when the first local plan was thrown out, and that has been found unlawful in people over wind. So obviously it's not satisfactory, but the obvious point here is where there's an implication here that you're saying that there is an appropriate assessment, and where the Greece case said certainly it cannot be held in assessments is appropriate where information and reliable and updated data concerning the birds in that spar are lacking, and there never has been an appropriate assessment conducted.
I'm sorry, Councillor Hyman, but you are in fact carrying on with the last question and not talking about this particular item. I must ask you to close.
Well, if you provide me with a copy, please, Leader, of the appropriate assessment that you say that we have, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 7, which is Dunsfold Park Garden Village. You can see the recommendation that we agree the implementation of government structure as is in your papers. Broadly speaking, we all know that Dunsfold Park is a strategic site in our LPP1. It includes two policies, SS7 and SS7A, which are associated with Dunsfold. There is also a planned performance agreement in place, and we have looked at other authorities and other sites with large sites and come up with what you can see on Annex 1 in page 11, which is basically an overarching Waverley Strategic Governance Board, which will be chaired by me as the leader, and reporting to it will be an advisory group, which is officer-led, and also a liaison group, which is officer-led, one being quite internal, and one having others on, and there is a monthly progress meetings which feed into those. The executive is content with these arrangements and is putting it forward for recommendation. Do any members of the executive wish to comment on it further? Very well. Can I put before you a slightly revised amendment that the executive agrees the implementation of the government structure as set out in this report and delegates to the leader the appointment of the actual members to the Waverley Strategic Governance Board and the Advisory Board and the Waverley Strategic Board. Sorry, they've been slightly moved around and covered in yellow paint. Is that agreed?
Great.
Thank you very much. Okay, let us move then to item 8. Surrey Hills Area of Outstanding National Beauty, and would the portfolio holder like to comment?
Thank you, Leader. Very little to say on this item other than to recommend its adoption. It's not a document produced by Waverley, but by the Surrey Hills Management Group, and we are part of that, and I recommend that we adopt it.
Any comments from members of the executive? Councillor Adams, I think you were down to speak to this item.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is not so, as I agree with what you said in that this is not a Waverley document, but it is a document which will affect Waverley's performance in respect of the AONB. So I have some comments which you can take into account if you wish, or not as otherwise. And there's about 7 of them. The first one is about B4 on page 39. It talks about the definition of it talks about biodiversity gain, and I think it might be helpful to define that in more vigorous terms. So because it's very woolly as to what they mean by biodiversity gain. The second point I make is about visitors in RT1 on page 41, where they talk about facilities for all the visitors which are going to be encouraged to visit AONB. What concerns me is that most of the toilet facilities have been closed down, and I'm wondering if there's going to be any consideration for providing more toilets, even if they're provided by current pubs and other establishments in existence. But obviously, if we're going to encourage a lot more visitors to go wandering around the countryside, they need to have some facilities that they can visit. Item 3 here is about planning under LU on page 43. One of the previous principles for the AONB was lower density developments. Has this been removed? Because it doesn't mention that anywhere in the management plan. And if not, I'd like to see some guidelines developed. These could relate to percentages in distance from urban centres or ranges of densities, which would be of great assistance to when inspectors are dealing with appeals. Because at the moment, we have no idea when large developments occur in the AONB, what an inspector's view is likely to be. Item 4 is how is it proposed that community transport will be provided, bearing in mind that that is in CE4 on page 45. The suggestion is there that community transport should be provided to help encourage visitors to move around the AONB. At the moment, I don't see how that can be funded. So perhaps somebody would like to ask that question of the management board. Right, then item 5 is really a point of is about infrastructure improvement. They mention infrastructure improvement in one section, and then they mention in a later section the preservation of country lanes. I think, you know, there's a bit of a conflict there, and perhaps that needs to be clarified also. And then there's a couple of items on the management pillar 5, 3.75.1, suggest an appendix covering the items to be reported and monitored. It's all very well just saying that the management board will create quarterly reports of items that are going to be covered, but it doesn't actually have an appendix telling you what items are going to be reported on or monitored. And the last one is same section point 4, explain why the Surrey Hills AONB needs a revised constitution. Thank you, Leader. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I mean, as you are aware, this isn't a Waverley document. It is prepared by the board of the AONB and goes to 5 different councils. And this is a light touch, as it says in the introduction, of a document that's been in existence for some time. But I will give the portfolio holder the opportunity to comment on anything if he feels so inclined.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Adams is obviously very experienced as a previous executive member and portfolio holder. And I would be very happy to meet him and discuss the suggestions that he's made. I haven't had any direct involvement with the AONB board, but I'd be very happy to make direct contact with them and discuss the points that Councillor Adams is putting forward. I don't want to go into them in detail right now because I wouldn't even understand them. But by getting together with Councillor Adams, I hope to gain an understanding of them and be happy to progress them.
Thank you very much. I also have Councillor Hyman down to speak.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I did have some concerns in respect of how full the policies were, but overall I thought actually that it's quite a good document. It's not bulky, it's not repetitive, and it's not waffle in there. It's a decent and clear and logical, well organised, with the policies set out, but it doesn't really have any teeth, of course, in areas where the Surrey Hills AONB don't have any powers, particularly in respect of planning and provision of services. So I do second a number of the questions actually which Councillor Adams has put forward, and I think the portfolio holder's offer to meet with him and go through those is good, but I don't think it solves the issue of whether we ought to be really okaying this without any other changes being made or suggestions perhaps being made. So it may be that the executive would like to instruct officers to take on board the comments and forward those comments along with a recommendation, otherwise they get missed because too late's too late. But if I can just refer you please quickly, because I'm going to run out of time otherwise, the map on page 20, it's page 2 of the document, page 20, it looks really nice in colour on the on the web, but and it's much clearer too that actually Waverley Borough Council is the largest sort of shareholder. Most of the Surrey Hills AONB appears to be in Waverley, and the other councils have very, very little areas. By comparison, more than half, I think, of the area itself is in Waverley. We must give it all the protection that's due. If I ask you just to turn to the bottom of page 7, which is page 25 of your executive papers, the very, very bottom and the last word on there, is in respect of a statement that they make, a 3-line statement, and it says check at the end of it. So I did have a quick check. I don't really see a problem with what they're saying, but I don't think that should be in there. Again, you could recommend to them that they check for themselves before they send it out to people and ask it to be agreed. But also we could insert, if we want to strengthen it, insert the words to comply with environmental legislation, and I would suggest that that be also a suggestion. And just, I think there's one other thing in respect of paragraph 1.8, which I've got down as page 10, so it's page 28 of your papers. An environmental report, I couldn't find these documents, and I'm a little bit disappointed about that. The SEA document or environmental report, and they have a rather elusive website portal as well. So I haven't been able to check those for myself, which is a little disappointing. But otherwise, I think it is actually good, and it just should have some caveats or recommendations that we put in view of the comments that have been made and any others that members have here of the executive, to show firstly that we've read it and that we care, but also to perhaps see if they could make some minor amendments post our agreement with it. I don't know whether that's acceptable to officers. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. I think in this case, Councillor MacLeod's offer to discuss this with Councillor Adams, and I imagine anybody else that's got particular queries on this, I'm sure he'll take that seriously and is appropriately placed to make any recommendations going forward. My request quickly to Councillor Adams would be, as it taxed my ability to type, would you be happy to send your points around to the rest of... Thank you.
Councillors, any more comments? Thank you both for your comments. Unless the portfolio holder wishes to send this back to the AONB for amendment, my wish would be to go with the recommendation. I certainly, and I'm sure it was said tongue-in-cheek, I certainly wouldn't like to change it just to show we'd read it, although it might be tempting in certain cases. Portfolio holder, are you happy to recommend that it goes forward?
Yes, I am indeed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The recommendation, therefore, is that the Surrey Hills AONB Management Plan 2020 to 2025 be adopted as statutory AONB management plan for the Waverley Borough Council. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Next item is item 9. Statement of community involvement, which I believe the portfolio holder is Councillor MacLeod again.
Thank you, Leader. There's a document in our papers produced by Graham Parrott, but in addition to that, I would like to report that Graham Parrott, Chris Berry and Matthew Ellis, we had a meeting with Councillor Hyman to discuss the proposed amendments to the Statement of Community Environment meeting. I'd like to report how that meeting went. There were 3 suggested amendments, or change, in fact 4. The first one, of course, was accepted, that Councillor Hyman had pointed out there had been layout problems and numbering problems, and of course we apologised for that, and we adopted the changes, and they're reflected on the version that's currently on the website. But in addition to that, there was 3 other things suggested. The first one was a request that the Statement of Community Involvement relates to the current adapted local plan. The answer to that one is that the Statement of Community Involvement in terms of local plans, it refers to local plans in general, not just this one, but any future ones. So we don't want to specifically tie it to this local plan. It's meant to be referred to all local plans, including any future ones. The second one, there was a need for consultation on the Statement of Community Involvement itself. The answer to that, firstly, there's no legal requirement to consult on the Statement of Community Involvement. And given that it was seen to be a light touch document with very little changes, and I've seen the similar documents at Surrey which went through in a similar light touch way, and there was no consultation there, and I'm not aware there's been consultations on the Statement of Community Involvement at other councils. We didn't feel it was necessary to do that here. We'd of course listen to any comments that members of the public have about it, and that can be an ongoing process. but it seemed over the top to have a formal consultation with all expense and time and work that would involve. The third amendment suggested was that the text setting out the assistance that the council should give to the neighbourhood plan groups who are modifying the plan should be in the statement of community involvement. The answer to that is that the council does give a great deal of assistance to towns and parishes that are preparing neighbourhood plans, and we're very committed to do that. But we don't feel it's necessary to introduce that information into this SCI. Much information on that is available on the council's website, and therefore the bottom line is that we don't feel the need to change the statement of community involvement other than the changes to numbering and layout that I referred to at the beginning. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. In view of what the portfolio holder has said, the recommendation, which is slightly revised from what you see on your papers in front of you, is that the Executive recommends to the Council that no further changes are required to the Statement of Community Involvement for the reasons set out in the report. And I have one speaker on this, which is Councillor Jerry Hyman.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, my concern was, and it remains, that as you see at paragraph 2.18 or 2.18 of your report, it says the Council does not have a specific policy as such to deal with neighbourhood planning. However, we do undertake assistance and help as detailed by legislation. And I fully accept that officers do give assistance, but that's not the point. The point is whether we place ourselves above the law here at Waverley. Because what the law says, and that's specifically from Section 18 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, is that, and I quote from paragraph 2b, a statement of community involvement must set out the local planning authority's policies for giving advice or assistance under, subparagraph B states, paragraph 3 of Schedule A2 to this Act, advice or assistance on proposals for modification of neighbourhood development plans. So it must give that policy. That's what the law says, and that was the point that I made at the council meeting in July. And as the council says it in 2.18, the council does not have a specific policy. And so, that is the reason why, and I'm slightly disappointed because, it pretty much was an object lesson in how not to make decisions when that came forward. I was very disappointed that the officer advice to the leader at the time did not accept that point, because I think it's fairly straightforward. And of course, I pointed out that it's not really a policy document, as is required. It states in Section 18 as well that it must be a policy document setting out the policies. It's more of a report, doesn't have separate policies. It was different to the version recommended to the council, with different paragraphs and numbers, and it was impossible to properly compare with and ascertain changes. There was no document control, no track changes, no scrutiny, didn't go to coordinating board. I mean, lots of tiny little mistakes, which across the board have ended up with us not having an improvement, any improvements to the to what really is quite an out-of-date SCI, and certainly is unsatisfactory in terms of content. So I'm very disappointed, particularly as it was the election pledges, that we're not taking this forward, and I'd like the Executive to make sure they bring it forward so we can straighten things out perhaps after Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I've already read out to everybody the revised recommendation, and unless the portfolio holder wishes to change it, I will put that to the Executive.
Happy to go ahead, Leader.
Thank you very much. You've all heard the revised recommendation. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 10, which is a property matter, and that is in the hands of the portfolio holder, Councillor Mark Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. The recommendation here is for us to approve the revised membership in terms of reference of the Property Investment Advisory Board. I'll take those back to front. So our corporate plan, our corporate strategy, is for a financially sound Waverley, but it is also to provide housing to buy and to rent for those at all income levels. Back in 2016, we established our property investment strategy as part of one of the pillars which we were using to deal with our budget strategy. And since that time, we've invested, I think, about £7 million in investment property. That has been entirely commercial property. The strategy that we've had and the climate that we are in means that we should and will be considering residential property from an investment purpose to rent out to tenants on the open market. And we have taken legal advice, and we have redrafted the Property Investment Advisory Board Terms of Reference to reflect that, and all of the changes that are redlined in there with a couple of sections I'll come to reflect that legal advice. The changes that aren't anything to do with legal advice are really at the very top, where we talk about the proposed membership for various reasons. The executive determined that we would move closer back to the membership as was envisaged when the advisory board was established in 2016. Confidentiality, skill sets, representation geographically and politically were all factors that we took into account there. The names aren't on the terms of reference, obviously, but I'm happy to confirm that they are, of course, myself, for finance and assets, Councillor Neal, for place shaping, Councillor Rosamond, for housing, and the non-executive councillors are Councillor Martin and Councillor Lee. We have met informally. We have agreed that we're all content to proceed as a board with that membership under these terms of reference. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. I ask the executive to approve the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Any comments from the executive? Thank you very much. And then the recommendation, it is recommended that the council approves the revised membership and terms of reference of the Property Investment Advisory Board. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We will move on to item 11, which is a property matter and is again in the hands of the portfolio holder, Councillor Mark Merriweather.
Thank you again, Leader. This item relates to our other strategy of encouraging devolution of responsibilities from Waverley down to the towns and parishes. In fact, in 2017, the towns and parishes were engaged to discuss the possibility of them taking over responsibility for certain assets in their jurisdictions and the costs of them. And that led to a long list of potential transfers, which under the old administration were determined to be transferable as leaseholds. Under our administration, we have opened that up and we have invited towns and parishes to consider whether they want to take on these assets as freehold. Obviously, the terms and conditions will be different because of the financial parameters as much as anything else. We are not forcing anything on anyone. This is entirely at the discretion of the town or the parish if they even want to ask for it, and when the terms are identified, they may not even want to proceed. We had previously received a request from Farnham to consider a freehold application for the Gostrey Meadow. I am absolutely thrilled that now that our message is getting out, we have received updates from certainly Hazelmere, possibly Whitley, and maybe even Wannish. They would like also to consider some of the sites to be considered for freehold transfers. So I do have an amendment to make to the recommendation. And I'm not sure, I should read it out, or does it go up on the screen now?
I'll read it out and save your voice.
Oh,
but
lovely. Thank you very much.
We'll let the speakers speak first.
Okie doke.
Councillor Hyman, sorry, you want to carry on?
No, I think I pretty much said it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hyman, you have your name down to speak.
Thank you, Leader. I was after that umbrella. All right, damn. This is obviously good in terms of bringing things under local control. I wouldn't consider it localism as such, because I think that's decision making on a local basis rather than necessarily ownership. And I'm not entirely sure that it's possible, but I'm not entirely sure that there's any concern with Waverley's ownership and the way that they run these. I know for certain that everybody's very happy with the way that that Gosford Meadows is run by Waverley, so that isn't a primary thing to me. My concern would be, and I hope perhaps Councillor Merriweather would come back and explain a little further. I think we've seen from paragraph 7 of the report on page 67 that the full year savings £40,000 from the Gosford Meadows site or management of it to Waverley. Waverley would save that money, but presumably that would then be that cost would fall upon the town council and similarly for parish councils who are considering freehold acquisitions. I was wondering, because I'm not a member of the town council, to what extent in 2017 the towns and parishes had indicated that they were happy to take them on without an income to help run them, and particularly whether there would be any implications for the precepts, because I appreciate that whilst there is no limit on the town and parish council precept increases, unlike the 3% for the borough and county, which I understand, I think we're told might be 2% for next February's maximum rise allowed in tax without having a council tax without having a referendum on it, or something like that. I am concerned that if residents aren't going to see any major difference, would they expect to see, might they consider this be a way that we're just putting up the cost of the council tax bill for them and having a bit more money at Waverley? I'm generally in favour of this, but I'd like those answers to that. Just also one other thing, there are no maps of anything in here. I don't want to refer to the pink papers to go into exempt, Leader, but I haven't seen in here anywhere any maps apart from the one freehold proposal that, for Gosford Meadow, showing where any of the others are and the extent to which they are being transferred. So I'm not entirely happy with everything being done by delegation. I'd like it to come before members, frankly, in council or scrutiny. Under Hazelmere Town Council, it says Tilford Play Area, Marchants Hill. Well, there's a Tilford Play Area in Tilford. This one, I understand from committee services who have been very helpful, is the Tilford Road Play Area in Beacon Hill that refers to, in case other people have picked up on that. But yeah, I would like to see some maps and what the real impact is on residents. Before I'd give it my absolute wholehearted backing. Although I know it is something we've been looking to do over some years. Thanks.
I've got Councillor Follows wants to speak, and then you want to go. Do you want to go first, Councillor Merriweather?
Please go first.
No, I'm happy to. Well, I'm not sure how much residents are going to see in terms of changes. These are places. They haven't got wheels. They're not going to stand up and walk off anywhere. Their custodianship, though, is going to be a lot more accountable. The custodianship will be with their local authorities rather than with us in our ivory tower, if you want to put it that way. In that custodianship, the costs might change. I think it's unfortunately, Councillor, very sort of one-dimensional to assume that the only way to pay for the upkeep of these parks is to tax people and pay out under a large contract. Certainly, I've heard that some councils believe that they can take better care of these sites for less money, and some councils believe that once these sites are liberated from Waverley, they will be able to engage even more closely with their local community to find more imaginative and pleasant ways of financing that. So I would just encourage you just to think out of the box, think about what an opportunity this is for us to respond to requests from the towns and parishes, valid requests, reasonable requests, requests in some cases that in their perspective correct a wrong that was done a few decades ago. And the councillor follows. If you want to add anything to that, I'm done.
Thank you. Yes, other than entirely agreeing with everything you said there, I mean, just from in my other hat as a town council leader, I just wanted to emphasise that this has been a dialogue between the towns and parishes and Waverley, and that this was in no way a sort of top-down pushing of these assets on these towns and parishes. They have been involved in every step of this. They're fully aware of any cost that they take on. They are entirely cognizant of what is going on here, and it's at their agency and ours together rather than any one direction here. So I also want to just add, I also support these recommendations in particular for this one in Gostrey Meadow, because I think it's also important that some non-Farnham councillors on the exec make it clear that they support this recommendation too. And also what we're trying to really say here is that we want to use this as a model for the engagement with the towns and parishes for some of these sorts of assets, which, as Councillor Merriweather has quite rightly said, there are plenty of opportunities for the really local communities to find other ways of making these assets work better for their local communities than just Waverley on high saying how we run things. And I completely agree with the other sentiment. Taxation through this is absolutely not the only way to raise the funds to do this. I suspect in the case of this, there are quite a significant volunteer population that can be mobilised by Farnham Town Council in a way that it could not be mobilised by Waverley Borough Council.
Councillors, any more comments? Very well, in that case, I will put the recommendation to you, which is slightly amended. It is in 4 parts. I'd like to take them all together with your indulgence. Recommendation 1, the leasehold transfer of assets as detailed in Appendix 1 be approved. Recommendation 2, the tapered funding arrangement for the leasehold transfers be approved. Recommendation 3, the freehold transfer of the Gostrey Meadow Farnham to Farnham Town Council be approved. And a new item 3A, delegated authority be given to the Head of Finance in consultation with the relevant portfolio holders to agree and complete other transfers from the list in Annex 1 on a freehold basis, subject to an independent valuation acceptable to the Head of Finance and an immediate transfer then of the annual net running costs. That's obviously to the town or borough or parish council. And item 4, delegated authority is given to officers to finalise the heads of terms and complete the necessary legal documents with the town and parish councils for the transfer of assets, with detailed terms and conditions to be agreed by the strategic director in consultation with the relevant portfolio holders. A bit of a mouthful, councillors, but is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We will then move on to item 12, which is a property matter, and again in the hands of Councillor Merriweather.
Actually, Councillor Beeman has very kindly volunteered to take this one on.
Volunteer, yes, okay. Leader, it's been a great pleasure to bring this to the executive in my position as the portfolio holder for the health, wellbeing and culture, in the sense that we've been approached by Holloway Hill Bowling Club for consent to surrender its existing license of the pavilion land and to take a new long lease of both the pavilion land and the bowling green itself, the bowling green being subject to a higher charge at the moment. As a consequence, we've encouraged this and we recommend to the executive that with the surrender of the current lease to Holloway Hill Bowling Club and a simultaneous grant of a new lease on terms and conditions as set out in the exempt annex, with other terms and conditions to be negotiated by the Estates and Valuation Manager, which will actually result in a small, well, very small financial benefit in a sense to the Borough Council. I'd like to move that, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. Any comments from the executive? In that case, the recommendation is that the executive agrees to the surrender of the current licence to Holloway Hill Bowling Club and the simultaneous grant of a new lease on terms and conditions as set out in Exempt Annex 2, with other terms and conditions to be negotiated by the Estates and Valuation Manager. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. The next item is also a property matter. Are you two vying for the rights of presenting it again? Councillor Beeman.
I think obviously the bowling clubs talk to each other, which is a good thing. A similar situation is in relation to the Godalming and Farncombe Bowling Club, which approached the council for a similar arrangement, the surrender of the existing lease of the pavilion, and to take a new long lease of both the pavilion land and the bowling green itself. And obviously we would like to recommend a similar arrangement where, in fact, the surrender of the existing current lease to Godalming and Farncombe Bowling Club and a simultaneous grant of a new lease on terms and conditions as set out in the exempt annex, with other terms and conditions to be negotiated by the Estates and Valuation Manager. I'd like to propose that, Leader.
Councillors, are you in stunned silence, or is anybody... in that Councillor Beeman has saved me the bother of reading the recommendation, can I say, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We have nothing in exempt, so there is no need to exclude the press and public, so thank you all for coming, and good night.